friends, welcome back to the No Wrong Turns podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Audrey the Hickman Hunter. The No Wrong Turns podcast talks to people about their stories and their passions. It aims to see how their passions have evolved and grown throughout their story. Happy New Year! How was your 2020 started off? I can't believe we're almost halfway done with January. So crazy. I'm so excited and looking forward to 2020, especially with the growth and growing of the No Wrong Turns podcast. Coming up later in the show, I will share with you the winner of our Cultivate What Matters 2020 planner and sticker giveaway. Thanks again so much to Cultivate What Matters for sponsoring our giveaway, and thank you to you listeners for participating. January is designated as National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Today's episode, we will be featuring a story and passion that highlights anti-human trafficking. This is our 5th episode, and today on the podcast, we welcome Andrew Larson. I met Andrew when he and I studied abroad in Athens, Greece, about 10 years ago. I can't believe I'm saying that. 10 years. That's a decade. We studied together at the Greek Bible College. Shout out to you, Greek Bible College. Whoop, whoop. In this episode, Andrew shares about his passion of anti-human trafficking, beginning when he first began learning about human trafficking when he was about 15 years old. When Andrew and I were studying at the Greek Bible College, we were required to serve in a weekly ministry. We both chose Nea Zoi. Nea Zoi means new life in Greek, and Nea Zoi is an anti-human trafficking organization. Now, 10 years later, Andrew shares his story and journey on how he has now moved back to Athens, Greece to serve on staff at Nea Zoi. You're going to want to lean in and not miss hearing how Andrew heard from God and how Andrew discerned and confirmed and then accepted God's call for him to move halfway across the world to Athens and serve at Nea Zoi. No matter if this is your story and if you can relate to him or not, I believe that there's something in this episode for you. Here is my conversation with Andrew. Welcome to the No Wrong Turns podcast. This is our 5th episode, and I have my friend Andrew that I know from studying with in Greece with me. And he's actually back in Greece, even though we studied there almost 10 years ago, which is crazy. So thank you, Andrew, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So can you tell me a little bit, so you are in Greece, but you did not grow up there. So can you tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, for sure. I am not Greek, but a lot of people here actually think I am, just because of my appearance. I'm a bit dark. But no, I come from a very small town in rural Minnesota. So small that we only have one stoplight.
Oh, wow.
That just flashes yellow at night. So having come from that sort of background to now living in Athens feels like a lot. It's a bit bombastic living in a city this large. But yeah, so I come from Minnesota and have spent nearly all of my life there. Aside from when, 10 years ago, we were both living in Greece for that year. That was my one sojourn out of Minnesota. But
awesome. So you lived in Minnesota all your life, and then did you go to college in Minnesota as well?
Yeah, so when I was 15, I went on my first mission trip, and I've been involved in missions ever since. But when it came time for me to graduate high school and actually go to college, at that time in my life, the last thing I wanted to do was live in Minnesota, let alone go to college in Minnesota, let alone the States. So I actually ended up in Greece. So the year that we spent there in Greece was my first year of college. But after that year, I returned back to the States and worked for a year and found myself working initially in a coffee shop, and then I continued on in that, but I eventually got a job working in the special education department at the middle school of my hometown, very randomly. And after that year, I continued my education at a university in St. Paul, Minnesota.
What was your major?
Elementary education.
And what made you choose that?
That's a great question because I don't work in education at all now. But I found myself in this elementary school context, and I saw just how formative the years of a person's life are during that time. And to be honest, even though I ended up after I graduated college, I ended up working with a ministry that worked solely with teenagers and college age students. I still found working with teenagers intimidating. So I thought, well, if I wanted to work in an educational capacity, like elementary school age is a good age. Like they still like you. They think you're
Yes,
really
they
cool.
do. Mm-hmm.
And they still are excited to learn at that point. It's still cool to want to learn, until they get into middle school and then things change. So
Puberty, it stinks
yeah,
in there.
puberty is terrible. Exactly.
Awesome. So you graduated in what year from college then?
So because I took a year off, I ended up graduating in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after college, what was your first job after you got out?
Well, simultaneously while going to college, I was asked to work for the missions organization, which was a discipleship and evangelism organization that focused on taking young people, again, high school and college age students, and put them in intense discipleship oriented context, but always in an overseas context. And anyway, the founder of that ministry asked me to work for him, and I didn't want to. And then he came back and asked me to do like an internship with him. So just during the summers, I would help lead these trips to the Middle Eastern Europe. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then halfway through my time, I ended up joining in a part-time capacity with the idea that once I graduated university, I would teach during the school years, and then in the summers, I would be working with this short-term missions organization. But I found as I continued on through my studies and as graduation was actually getting closer, that I couldn't show up in both places as fully as I would have wanted to. So it felt like for me, I needed to choose one over the other. And in the end, the missions job won out. So I technically started part-time through college, but then immediately once I graduated, I just moved into a full-time capacity with them.
So that this was the same organization that you were involved with from the time you were 15, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So I went once when I was 15, thought it was just like a one summer deal, found myself going back that next summer when I was 16, and the same thing just kept happening until the guy asked me to stay and do an internship with him. So I ended up doing 13 total summers with this organization.
Wow, that's almost half your life.
Yeah, it is. I'm 28 and it is nearly half my life.
So then after, did you immediately, what was that? Can you walk us through how you got from that position to where you are now?
Yeah, to do that, I'll have to go back to 10 years ago when we were both in Greece. And as you may remember, part of the requirements of the Greek Bible College was to be involved in some sort of ministry outreach, which, to be honest, I initially found kind of annoying and irritating because I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to like study and then go to the beach. But I found myself volunteering for a Greek nonprofit organization called Nea Zoi, which means new life in Greek. And they work with victims of human trafficking or and just individuals in prostitution in general. And so I volunteered that year. I worked specifically with transgendered prostitutes and loved it. And after that year, there was a big part of my heart that stayed there. And I think, I don't know if I was cognizant of it in the moment, but I think a part of me was always wondering if I would be back in some capacity. Flash forward to working with the ministry that I was involved with for so long. A big part of it was, a part of my heart was exposing young people to the many different ways that God is at work in this world, and challenging them to see how they could join in with what he's doing. In one summer, after we were working in Israel for a couple of weeks, we ended up taking our team to Greece. And that was my first time back since having lived there for the year for school. And I intentionally designed that summer missions experience for my team so that we were partnering with many different types of ministries, not just in Athens, but up in the north as well, and on the outskirts of Thessaloniki. And my heart was, I want to expose the students this summer to the various things that are going on in Greece. And I felt like God was asking me to ask him to bring one person back to serve his people in Greece full time. And so I kept that.
Besides you, or just one person?
It was one person. And I think in my mind, I was like, well, I'm obviously already working for a ministry, so I can't do that.
I'm out.
But it was, yeah, I'm out. I'm unqualified to do that. But that was in 2014. And I found myself praying that. Flash forward another couple of years, I found myself in Greece again on behalf of my old organization doing a research trip for my colleague, who it just made sense for me to go there and do some ground research for a team he was taking later that year. And I had spent a couple weeks here. I was meeting with various ministry contacts throughout the country. And then I was down in Athens, and the director of Nea Zoi, I was visiting her again. Her name's Martha, and she's a very good friend of mine. And
I remember.
Do you remember
her.
Martha?
Yeah, because I didn't have her as well, but I remember her. She's like, she just seemed like she's an older woman, but I'm sure now, I mean, she's probably seems the same, but she was always like, had like tons of energy, like super sweet.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Martha's a rock star. She's amazing. I just love her. So I was spending time with her. She was bringing me back to the airport. I'm not a very charismatic person, but it was like I heard almost like the audible voice of God saying, your time here is not done and you'll be back. And to be honest, my first internal response and reaction to that was, oh no. I don't know if I really want that.
Yeah.
Because I think the year that we lived in Greece was a good year, but it was hard. And prior to that, I had this idea. It was definitely a romantic idea of what living overseas was like. And that was quickly broken. So when I heard, you know, whatever it was, saying that I would be back, my eyes were certainly open to the reality of it, that it wasn't, I very much knew for the most part what that meant. And it meant a lot of sacrifice, and yeah, it was hard. Anyway, that was in 2017, and it's now 2 years later. I'm here in Greece. I've been here for 5 months. So it's been a journey of making sure that I heard that correctly. And then wanting to go about this transition of moving out of this agency that I had spent literally almost half my life with, very formative season of my life, transitioning out of that while transitioning into a new sort of space with my family and friends, and what that will look like for me overseas, and then transitioning to a new organization and serving with them here. It's been a trip.
Yeah, I bet. So can you tell us a little bit? So you moved to Athens 5 months ago, and can you tell us like a little bit about how the transition has been for you? And then we'll kind of get into specifics about what you do.
Yeah, I'll say that the transition has been a whole lot easier simply because I already had an existing community here in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
There were people that went through my training program with the company I'm serving with that are serving in places that they've never been before.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to a place where they don't know anybody, and I just think, wow, I don't know if I would be able to do that. So the transition has definitely been hard. It's probably one of the hardest things I've done in my life. Um, but it's been alleviated because there's already some sense of community here in Greece already. And ever since living here 10 years ago, I have stayed in somewhat regular contact with people back here. I knew the language at like a survival level. So that also
Order
made it
food,
much. Yeah,
directions,
I
shoe
can order
size.
food. Exactly. So those things have certainly made it easier
Mm-hmm.
for sure. But do I also cry on average once a day? Yeah, I do.
But you also are pretty lucky you got to have your family visit you a couple weeks ago, right?
Yes, my twin sister, her husband, their two kids, and my dad all came for 2 weeks.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it was a blast. Especially my sister, Natalie, and her husband, Brady, they've been here before they ever had kids. They had been to Greece before, so they had some semblance of an idea of what life would look like here. But
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm established into my new normal in my new
Yeah.
life, and having them here to be able to get to see that has also made it like when I'm calling home and having a conversation with them, they can actually see and picture and hear what my daily life looks and feels like. And that's also made the transition easier.
Yeah, they already know what you're talking about. They know what your street looks
Exactly.
like.
Exactly. Yeah. And both my sister and Brady, there are several outreaches that I do to the community of people that find themselves forced in prostitution at some level. They both got to come out on one of those outreaches. So that meant so much to me, not only because they support me in what I
Mm-hmm.
do, but they're just so invested in it,
Yeah.
and they're that much better able to pray for me, having tasted for themselves a little bit of what I'm doing.
That's great. Being able to have like seen and known and be able to understand when you're talking about it and not just have some kind of, like maybe it looks like this kind of picture, but to actually know.
Right. Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit about the organization Nea Zoi and what they do?
Yeah. So I'll back up just a little bit to help maybe frame exactly in what capacity I'm here. I'm here serving with a global nonprofit called One Collective.
Mm-hmm.
Um that works around the world to ensure that no one, their motto is, we work so that no one is invisible and everyone has access to food, freedom, and forgiveness, which is an approach just to life and faith that I find to be incredibly holistic and was just really in line with where I was at. Anyway, One Collective has had workers throughout the world for many, many, many years. And there was a One Collective worker back in the 90s who was here, who founded Nea Zoi.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that was in 97. But like I said earlier, Nea Zoi it's Greek. It means new life. And officially we're an association that works for the support and restoration of individuals in prostitution. And we say that because, you know, I'm bad at math, but 95% of the people we work with are trafficked, are victims of human trafficking. They're forcibly in these positions where they're being exploited sexually countless times a day, every day for, way too long. But there is another very small segment of people that have at some level have chosen to enter the world of prostitution out of their own volition, but I would actually argue that they didn't really have much of a choice. And these people there's a trans population here in Greece
Mm-hmm.
that in the States, I know that issues surrounding LGBT Q plus can be a bit controversial.
Mm-hmm.
But here it's even more so. And not only is the gay community ostracized in Greece, the trans community within that community is even more ostracized. So there are these people that have been ostracized and rejected by their own families. It's next to impossible for them to get jobs in other sectors of society. And again, the ones that we interact with find that the only way that they really can afford to make a way for themselves is by prostituting themselves. And so at some level, they're choosing it. Like they don't have a trafficker, they don't have a pimp,
Mm-hmm.
forcing their hand to be out on the streets. But it's also circumstantial, and there's not really much of a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's what we do. We orient our lives around spending time with these people and trying to help them find a new life, a new way
Mm-hmm.
out of their current reality.
Do you have maybe like a favorite memory or a story that you can share about maybe someone who made that decision and you were able to help them, or maybe a story from afar that you could share?
Yeah. I'll say this. So when I was here several years ago, just visiting, I was again visiting Martha, and I'm not going to use this person's real name, but let's call her the Nye. And the Nye, we had met the Nye years ago. Every week with the trans community anyway, it looks like every Thursday night we're out on the streets where they're working, we're visiting them, we're driving through the city visiting them. And we usually go out around 10 p.m. and get back. Depending on how busy it is, we get back at 1 to 3 o'clock in the morning. And we do this every week. So we met Denai years ago, and initially she wanted nothing to do with us. She didn't trust us, understandably.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these people, they've been rejected by almost everybody they know.
Yeah.
And really their main interactions with society at large is either clients who are obviously just using them for their sexual services, or people that drive by and gawk at them, make fun of them, throw garbage,
Mm-hmm.
glass bottles, like treat them poorly. So they're not very open or trusting outside of their community, understandably. And then I was this way. She didn't really trust us. But week after week, we'd go and visit her, and she eventually warmed up. And after a period of time, she said, if this God that you keep telling me about really is as loving as you say that he is, then I think I want to get to know a little bit more about him.
Wow.
And and so with time, we gave her a Bible, and with time, she was reading that, and she was, this life with God, this life with Christ, discipleship towards Christ,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and I know you know this, is not instantaneous. It is a process, and we are all at some place along that process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for her, as she continued to orient her life towards the things of God, she didn't necessarily have right theology. She didn't necessarily have all the right answers. You know what I mean? Come from,
Right.
quote, the right background. She was still doing the best that she could with what she had
Mm-hmm.
to orient herself towards the things of God. And so as she was reading, there came a point where she said, I feel like God is saying something to me about how I treat my own body. And I think he might want me to give up smoking. And we're like, yeah, maybe. I mean, you know, God has created you. He wants wholeness and goodness for you. He wants restoration and flourishing for you, not just spiritually, but physically, emotionally as well. I mean, it's a very holistic thing. And so as she continued to, she was still living her life, which at this point meant even though she was born physically as a man, she was still living as a woman. She was still engaged in her job as prostituting herself. But she was also reading the Bible and on this journey of following God. And the first step for her meant, I'm going to give up smoking. After another bit of time, as she continued to orient herself around the things of God and taking things in and considering them, she said, she had a lot of conflict with the other people in her life, even other workers in her community. And she said, I feel like as I've been paying attention to Jesus, he's saying a lot of things about forgiveness. And I feel like he may want me to forgive people. And so again began this journey of she started to forgive people. Forgive, her family for rejecting her and ostracizing her for, 30 whatever years. Other trans workers that they got into territorial disputes and fights over, like, this is my corner. Stop stealing my clients. And again, it was a beautiful thing. Like, here she was as what I would call a disciple of Jesus, following the ways of Jesus in time, the best way that she could. And shortly after this, she eventually got to the point where she said, I feel like God is saying something to me about this whole me selling my body for money. And I don't think that it's a very dignifying thing. I don't think that it's honoring God, and I don't think it's honoring me. And so she took a step of faith that I have yet to see a lot of people I know in my own life, myself included, take this step. She decided to leave the work of prostitution, which was significant for a number of reasons. One, it meant that she gave up her only source of income. So within a month's time, she had no money to pay her rent, and she found herself on the streets. She couldn't go back to her family. She had nobody, no family or friends in her life. They had all rejected her. So she had nowhere else to go. And yet she was still faithful to her and obedient to understanding of what God's call in her life was for that moment of this. I want to orient you more towards the things of God. And Martha, being the saint that she is, took the Nea in. So the Nea wasn't living on the streets. And around the same time, the Nea ended up getting cancer. And I think it was cancer of the mouth. So that when I met the Nea, I know that, like, it was in the mouth or in the throat, but anyway, part of her tongue or something was missing. It had to be removed because of the surgery. And so it was a bit difficult to understand her. But here this woman was, and she was essentially dying, but she was being faithful to the things of God step by step. Anyway, she ended up passing away. And, that was meeting the Nea and hearing her story and what her discipleship towards Christ looked like has had a huge impact on me and has really shaped my perspective on what life looks like with this community in particular. So I don't know if I'm totally answering your question. I can be a bit long-winded, but that's
a great example of kind of the process and choices that people make, and that you're supporting them and just affirming them as getting to know Jesus and following him and being discipled.
Yeah.
Are you in the market for some new headshots for your resume or LinkedIn profile? Or do you just want some fun, candid pics for the gram? NV Photos Photography is a Chicago-based photography company. NV Photos' specialty is capturing urban and candid portrait shots. Contact Nicole for your new photo session via Instagram at Envy Photos. Mention me, Audrey, and you'll get $25 off your first session. Again, you can book and find more information about Nicole and Envy Photos via the Instagram at Envy Photos. That's at ENVYFOTOS. All right, now back to the show.
We're going to just pivot a little bit and talk about, I know that a lot of times when human trafficking or prostitution comes up, there's a lot of myths that are associated with this, or a lot of times people hear about it and they have kind of a lot of preconceived ideas. Is there any that you have found in your work and in your time that have come up a lot and kind of just been, you found a lot of people believe this, but this isn't actually true about human trafficking?
That's a good question. I don't know if I would say that these are myths, but a question, or maybe it's more accurate to say a statement, but that I have heard quite a bit is, people say, I just don't understand why they can't leave. Like, why can't they just leave? Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's not so much, maybe education surrounding, like, even the logistical, if you can say that, the logistical side of the situations that the girls actually do find themselves in. What was that Liam Neeson movie? Taken.
Oh, Taken.
I think a lot of people think, I think a lot of people, that's maybe only their only frame of reference, or, more modern frame of reference. Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's actually, extreme, but true. Like, the things, obviously Liam Neeson, like, being totally BA and, like, doing all those, like, crazy chases on.
You're not being trained to do that in your work?
I can neither confirm or deny that. But no, it's a horrendous industry for sure. But I think, there seems to be a lack of knowing exactly why can't these girls get away. And even, a lot of, clients in this field, we call people that go to brothels and engage in this, that we call them Johns. They're the customers or the clients. And at some level, there's a significant portion of these Johns think that the women, they don't realize that the women are there against their will. Mm-hmm. And they say things like, she wants to do this. Look at her. She's smiling. She looks happy. She presents herself. And there's just not an awareness that what they're seeing is actually not reflecting reality. Mm-hmm. But as far as, like, myths, if I've heard one, it certainly hasn't stuck in my memory.
Another follow-up question to that is, what do you think? So I guess you would say that, like, a lot of times, I've heard you say it twice now, that, or alluded to it at least, that people that you're working with, this is kind of a last resort, or they don't have any other job option available to them, so that's the reason why it's hard to leave. Is that correct?
I maybe should have clarified a bit more. That is primarily true with the trans community, which is, they don't necessarily have a trafficker or a pimp or somebody forcing their hand. Mm-hmm. So for them, it's kind of a last resort. But a majority, like a high majority of the women and, children, there mm-hmm. are minors involved in this. No, they were deceived into it. Mm. They, a lot of them are coming from places that just don't have the same access to resources and education It's not that these people are unintelligent. These people are highly intelligent women that have just been deceived, and they're coming from places like Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Russia, former Soviet republics. But with the crisis that's happening, that's been happening in South America, especially Venezuela and Colombia. Just last week, we met two new girls that I believe are minors. Of course, they're not telling us their real age, but that were from Venezuela.
Wow.
Which is just sad. I mean, they're just so far from home. Human trafficking is it's a global issue, to be sure. But yeah, they've somehow found their way here. But
yeah. So you have known about this organization for a long time, but for people who are wanting to learn more or just become more educated on the issue, do you have any anywhere that you think would be a good place for them to start, or a resource, I guess, that you could suggest so people could learn more about this?
that is a fantastic question. Yeah, there are so many organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, as well as government-funded organizations, not just in the United States and Canada, but around the world, that are doing a lot. For listeners that find themselves primarily in the United States, I'm forgetting what they're called at the moment. There's a lot of collaboration with the FBI, but the Homeland Security. Hold on, let me pull it up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
They're this company. Hold on. Okay, yeah. So there's several U.S. government entities that are a great place to, learn more about this. But then they have also collaborated with various companies. One of them is the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. And every year, the State Department puts out an annual TIP report, a Trafficking in Persons report. That is, you can access online. It's free. They have an electronic sort of PDF that anybody could download, and it's really quite thorough, taking a look at this issue, not only in the United States, but globally. And then they do, each year, they have some more detailed reports on various countries that they're highlighting that particular year. But that I would suggest, I would direct anybody really to the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking. There's another organization, of course it's escaping my memory. I'm going to blame it on language school. I'm exhausted.
Oh yeah,
all the time.
I just finished that.
I did. I came straight from there. Another company is, have you heard of Exodus Cry?
No, I haven't.
It's a faith-oriented organization, but they are prolific as well. They've been around. They know their stuff. But they're probably most well known for a film that they produced almost 10 years ago, I think in 2011, called Nefarious. And it's kind of a documentary. They do some, I don't know the correct terms for it, but it highlights this issue, and then again focuses on a couple of different companies around the world. But that was when we have short-term teams come, or people that are wanting to learn more about this issue, we generally show them, it's maybe an hour, it's an hour and a half or something.
Okay.
This film, and we find that that's a pretty good place to start. It's pretty jarring. I cry every time I watch it.
Wow.
It's intense, but I would recommend going to the State Department website, looking at their annual Trafficking in Persons report, and then heading over to Exodus Cry. And between the two of them, they've networked so much, and I put out a lot of really good information.
That sounds like two good places to start for people who are interested in learning more. If you could think back to when you didn't know too much about this, or when you started your job, I guess, what is there something that you wish you had known when you were starting out, whether that be, I don't know, facts, or maybe just kind of like maybe a mindset or perspectives, or anything you wish you had known when you started?
I felt pretty fortunate because the first time I was ever introduced to this issue in general was in the context of visiting an organization that was doing something about it. Mm-hmm. So I feel like had I not, I mean, it's obviously horrific what is happening to, millions of people. A lot of them are very young, they're kids.
Yeah.
If I had heard just that, and I tend to be a bit more on the sensitive side. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that I would have been overcome and overwhelmed by just the gravity of the situation. But because I was first introduced to it in the context of this is an issue for sure, but we're also doing something about it. So that gave me hope. And that was when I was 15. I met an organization in Nepal, and then that same summer, another one that was doing work in the red light district of Bangkok, Thailand. That again, I mean, as a 15-year-old prepubescent boy, I only could understand so much, but I remember feeling totally overwhelmed, thinking there are people, my peers, that have had their very lives taken away from them, and how inexplicably, evil and awful and devastating that is. And yet there are people that are orienting their lives around combating this injustice. So I don't know, I felt pretty fortunate that my first introduction was in that, context.
Yeah. So you learned about it at the same time you were with a organization that was giving support and making the situation seem hopeful, not
exactly
unhopeful.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing about your story and how you got to where you are, and a little bit about what you're doing now. Before we close, I have one question that I'm asking all the podcast guests, and that is, what is fueling you today? What's fueling your passion? So this could be anything from a new coffee order, a new book, maybe a new language study tool for you, or a new favorite part of town. What's fueling you today?
That is a fantastic question. I would say because a significant portion of my time every day is being spent and oriented towards learning the very difficult Greek language. It can feel like there are days where I feel like I'm never going to get it. But what fuels me is then when I'm out on the streets at night and I'm suddenly able to pick up, I had just learned a word that morning, and then I'm hearing one of these precious people talking, and most of it, like literally, it's all Greek to me. But then suddenly I do understand it. And that's like, okay, it's helpful, and it reminds me, okay, this is why I'm here. And it helps me return and maintain a proper perspective and not be overcome. But also naps are fueling me as well. So either one.
I think they go hand in hand.
They really do.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and for taking away from your precious nap time to talk with us here on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I enjoyed it. So thank you.
Friends, I have loved getting to chat with Andrew and hearing his story. It was awesome to see how Andrew heard from God, where he was supposed to serve, and then confirmed and accepted God's direction. I hope that we are all encouraged today about how Andrew found one of his passions many years ago and is now serving at Nea Zoi, working to support those in prostitution in Athens to find restoration and new life. You might be like Andrew and have a passion or interest for many years, but like Andrew, maybe you needed to keep your ears open to be listening to see if God is moving you to pursue this passion as a possible new vocation. My prayer is that you consider what God has for you and what He might be leading you to do. All right, can we get a little drum roll for our giveaway winner? All right, our winner is Lynn's from @philosophicallyfree. Lynn's, check your DMs so we can get your address to send the Cultivate What Matters 2020 planner and stickers. Congrats. Thank you again to Cultivate What Matters for sponsoring this giveaway. As we wrap up our podcast today, I wanted to share with you a few goals I have for the new year. Because I think if you speak these goals out, or if you have any dreams or plans or something you want to do, maybe there might be a better likelihood of follow through and accountability. So I have 3 goals. The first one is starting mini monthly habits. So for example, this month I have 2 that I'm working on. The first is dry January, so I'm about halfway through. I have not had a drop of alcohol since New Year's Eve last year. And the second one is I've been using this desk workout app, and it's not really necessarily so much of like a workout, but it's every hour it tells me that I need to stretch, and then it walks me through a variety of stretches, and I'm hoping that will help me with the Hunchback of Notre Dame situation I have going on, because I'm always just hovering over my keyboard as I work. My second goal is to listen to the Bible in 1 year via the Commuter Bible podcast. If you have not heard of this, I've told a bunch of my family and friends and gotten some of them to sign on to do this with me. The Commuter Bible podcast is just listening to the Bible 5 times a week during the weekdays, and it's 30 minutes or less, so then you can listen to the Bible in 1 year. And my third goal is to speak and teach the Bible 1 to 3 times this year. So if you're listening and you have a youth group, women's group, need someone to fill in a Sunday morning sermon, I would love to stretch my Bible teaching and preaching muscles. Since graduating from seminary, I feel like this is something that I just don't get to do or have the opportunity to do as much. So just throwing that out there. If anybody, wants to ask me, I could be available. Thank you all for listening to the No Wrong Turns podcast, and we will see you back here in 2 weeks for our next podcast. See the show notes for our music credits.